Thank you so much to all of you for being here. We'll get started here as people continue to filter in. We want to make the most of our time since this is the last session before dinner tonight, and we're grateful for all of you who are here. My name is Libby Casey, and I'm a broadcast journalist at the Washington Post, formerly a reporter based in Fairbanks, Alaska, and a reporter working for that lady right over there, Lori Townsend, for Alaska Public Media. So it's wonderful to be back in Alaska. I'd like to introduce my panelists and have them come up to the stage for this discussion. Let's start with Ambassador David Balton, Executive Director of the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, and this, of course, is within the Executive Office of the U.S. President. Let's have Ambassador, there he is, Ambassador Kaizo Takiwaka, Ambassador in charge of Arctic Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs, Japan. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being here. We have Dr. Daly Sambo Doro, International Chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. We welcome her to the stage. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to slow down to give a moment. Ms. Aya Chemnitz-Larsen, Chair of the Standing Committee of Parliamentarians of the Arctic Region, member of the Danish Parliament. Welcome to you. Coordinator Jim DeHart, U.S. Coordinator for the Arctic Region, Department of State. Welcome so much. And last but not least, Minister Kenneth Hoig, Head of Greenland Representation in the United States and Canada. We welcome you to the stage. Thank you so much. So we'll jump right into things, but first I wanted to invite Dr. Daly Sambo Doro to give some comments on what this moment means for your work, given the close relationships that you have across the borders that are so fraught right now. And the microphones, if you see the red dot, they should be ready for you to go. Thank you.
They're hot. Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much, because the situation is very delicate for organizations like the Inuit Circumpolar Council. And first, allow me to acknowledge all the Inuit in the room, every Inuk in the room. I think we have some extraordinary capacity, intellect, and diplomatic skills that you've seen in the course of the last 2 days. I just want to acknowledge every Inuk present and know that you're making extraordinary contributions. And before I do proceed, I wanted to indicate that the Inuit Circumpolar Council emerged in the context of the Cold War. So the current conditions that we're facing are really not new to us. And our efforts to ensure the unity of Inuit, including our membership in Chikatka, has to be recalled. And Eben Hobson, the recognized founder of the ICC, had extraordinary foresight in terms of bringing the family of Inuit together. And the participation of our direct blood relations in Chikatka was denied at the time. Yet, regardless, we have managed to bring our people together and promote dialogue and promote our status, our rights, and our role in a context that is ever changing around us. But I'm very proud to say that we, as Arctic Indigenous peoples, have maintained consistency with our messaging, and we recognize the changes that are taking place around us. And I think bottom line is that because we're the original inhabitants of this cryosphere, of this unique region of the world, we have to have a seat at every single table concerning Arctic relations, because it means our security. It means our food security, our environmental security, our cultural security, our overall security for Inuit Nunaat and every single one of our communities. So I just wanted to make those remarks, especially in the context of where do we go from here in the present geopolitical and geostrategic issues. So, Qianak, thank you.
I'll have some of our other panelists reflect on how they are factoring Indigenous voices into the decisions. But first, tell us more about the relationships that are happening across the border with Russia. We've been seeing statements come out that look like they're sort of PR generated from the Kremlin. What are the relationships like right now?
For the moment, as many may know, we are preparing for our next General Assembly, the 14th General Assembly of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Unfortunately, it will be held virtually. Things are uncertain at all times, but we're preparing for that in July of this year. And frankly, our communications and our outreach to our membership in Chikaka has not been put on pause. We've maintained our outreach and our contact to gain their input, their views and opinions about how the agenda should be shaped, how the declaration should be informed, and so forth. So we haven't directly seen any swerving in terms of the current conditions. Of course, one always wonders if you're being surveilled, right? I mean, I think I can be frank about that. And in my assessment, we are able to carry forward the work that's necessary to maintain that unity of the Inuit voice, including in the context of our General Assembly. With regard to the, undercurrents that may be influencing some of the broader debate and dialogue, we have not seen that emerge out of our membership. I'm cognizant of the fact that for other Arctic Indigenous peoples, this has been somewhat problematic, and I think everyone following and carefully monitoring these developments is aware of forces and splinters, so to speak, but nevertheless, we've managed to maintain our relations and our contact, and we are really hoping that there's a resolution to this particular conflict that doesn't cost any more than it already has, and that we can kind of regain some normalcy across the board completely.
Ambassador Bolton, I see you nodding. Talk to us about how those relationships may be able to survive outside of these, these sort of communication blockades, essentially the shunning of Russia from so many international bodies because of the actions in Ukraine.
So first, let me thank. Oh yeah. Thanks very much, and let me thank Arctic Encounters for inviting me. What Daly's describing has been true as long as I've been involved, that the Arctic Indigenous peoples have relationships that are different from the government-to-government relationships, and in some ways more flexible and perhaps less constrained. And I think what Daly's describing, the ability to work across with colleagues in Chikuka in advance of your General Assembly, is testament to that. The governments basically are not talking to one another, with limited exceptions that we've heard about. Yeah, shunning is a good word. We're in a new phase. We seem to have reached some kind of inflection point. And Daly wants a return to normalcy. The one thing I've picked up in talking to a lot of smart people here over the last day and a half is that normalcy does not seem in reach at the moment.
I have more to hear from you on the role of Indigenous voices, but first, let's stay on this for one moment. You and I were talking before this panel about other egregious actions Russia has taken over the past decade, from the invasion of Crimea to meddling and interference in American elections and other elections, and yet the work of the Arctic Council and other international northern bodies were able to continue. How were they able to continue up until this point?
Well, Jim could probably address this better than I at this point. What I would say is that, from my past experience, the reason people spoke of Arctic exceptionalism was because of the willingness of the governments involved to compartmentalize. to set aside the differences between Russia and the other countries in the Arctic over Syria, over Crimea, over election interference, over computer hacking, in favor of our mutual interests in the Arctic. That's not possible right now.
Let's turn that to you.
Yeah, I think it's the right question, because this is not the first invasion of Ukraine. It's not the first violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. But I think some differences, I think we were better prepared for this one. We knew for quite a long time that unfortunately this was going to happen, that Vladimir Putin was going to do this. We saw it very clearly, we talked about it, we released the information we had about his plans. We hoped that we were mistaken, and then it took place. And I think there's also a difference in scale here, an enormity of what we're seeing in terms of of Putin's violation of Ukraine and what it means obviously for the Ukrainian people who are suffering such atrocities, and for the security of the larger region, for Europe and for us, for all of us. And so it's been an unprecedented action to isolate Russia, which is absolutely appropriate. And it affects our ability to work with Russia in the Arctic, because this violation of principles don't stop at borders. Principles are universal, and so we have to take that into account everywhere, including the Arctic.
Ms. Chemnitz-Larsen, let's talk about your approach to this moment. I know so much of this week has pivoted to security, and there's a lot else to talk about, but I would like to hear from you how you're navigating a future direction.
Thank you. Koyana. I just want to say, first of all, I'm so happy to be here. I'm very humble. I'm Inuk, coming from Greenland, so it's so great to represent Greenland here and to be here. And it's kind of like seeing family and friends, and I just look among the faces, because usually it's almost like family to me to be here. So thank you. First of all, we've been looking at how the Arctic Council is handling all of this situation with Russia and the war in Ukraine. And at Arctic Parliamentarians, it's been important for us to say that Russia is a key player when it comes to the Arctic. That's a fact. But we can't continue the work. And we've been following, the work that the Arctic Council has been doing, so we've been posting the work. But we need to ask ourselves some questions on, is this going on for months or for years, and how will this affect, for example, the climate crisis? Can the climate crisis wait for us for this war to end? And do we need to find other ways to collaborate? It goes the same with indigenous people's rights. It's the same with sustainable economic growth. How can we make sure that this will happen in the Arctic? Because there's a need for that. So some of the things that we're discussing is whether we should have at least not necessarily a new forum, because I don't think we need that. I don't think we should have a Arctic Council, for example, without Russia. But I think we need to have a place where we can have an informal dialogue, and this is something that we're discussing right now. How can we do this, and how can we make sure that all the work that we've been doing, both at the Arctic Council, but especially at Arctic Parliamentarians, how can we continue the work and make sure that all these issues that needs to be addressed and that needs to be focused on is something that we're still working on, and having this informal dialogue. I think that's important.
I've been asked to share, we should all keep our microphones close and speak up. Let's follow up with you on that, in the importance of Indigenous voices being part of the conversation and also leadership. How from your part of the world, is that factored in to everything from philosophy to actual governing and opportunity?
It's just, I represent Greenland, but I'm at the Danish Parliament, and this is 2,500 miles away from each other. And this is, two different cultures, and trying to build a bridge between two different cultures, and just the fact that, in my opinion, I think politics is very much about psychology. And understanding the other partner, because I think the way that Denmark is seeing things is very different from the way that Greenland is seeing things. And Denmark, for example, being a part of Europe and being very concerned on what's going on in their near area is different compared to us. And, for a long time, there's been a lot of focus in the Danish parliament also to maybe put a pressure on Greenland on how can you collaborate with Russia on Arctic issues when we see things so differently. So I think it's just, it complicates things for me at least. But I think it makes it even more important to make sure that, we build this bridge between different cultures and different, both the Nordic Arctic countries, but also the North America and in time, hopefully Russia as well, because as I said, there's so many things that we need to work on still that needs our focus.
Thank you. Ambassador Kaizo Takiwaka, I want to get you into the conversation. Tell us about the priorities right now in Japan when it comes to the Arctic. And I know you've been having a lot of conversations this week, talking to people. What is emerging as opportunities that you see?
Well, thank you. Let me reiterate that we are so thankful for the organizer to invite Japan to this valuable forum for the first time. And I hope this would help enhance Japan's cooperation on the Arctic. And for the audience, we have distributed a piece of paper about the policy framework. Let me talk about two matters. Indigenous population and science. For Japan, we think that the participation of indigenous population is an integral part of cooperation on the Arctic. Last year, we co-chaired together with Iceland the meeting called ASM3, Arctic Science Ministerium, third meeting. For that meeting, that theme was knowledge for a sustainable Arctic. And to that meeting, Arctic state and indigenous population and non-Arctic state joined together. And we think that indigenous traditional knowledge is very important for scientific cooperation. The other aspect is that before the COVID, December 2019, we invited 10 Alaskan young people from Alaska to visit Japan. They visited Tokyo to make a courtesy call on dignitaries like Madam Kamikawa, then Secretary General of the Parliamentary League Study Group on the frontier of the Arctic, as well as National Institute of the Polar Research. And they also visited Hokkaido, where they met Ainu, sort of Japan's indigenous population, as well as local junior school students. From our viewpoint, what's most important for Japan's cooperation on the Arctic is science. But the other side of the coin is that the lack of data and science on the Arctic. We don't have a sufficient data on the Arctic, and we would like to have a Arctic-wise observation and research in order to collect more data. And that is why last year we started a process of constructing a new research vessel with icebreaker capacity. What's significant about this vessel is it is intended to be a new international platform open to the participation of as many countries as possible, so that it's going to be an even-handed approach for research and observation.
Thank you. Mr. DeHart, I hope this question goes to you, but let's talk about where the United States is at in terms of our research vessels as well as our defense vessels and our capacity, and how is that conversation changing perhaps right now with what we see happening in the North?
Yeah, I think first of all, we're extremely proud of the science that we do.
Is your microphone on? Look for a red button there. Okay. You might
Yes,
have to project.
how's this?
Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, we're extremely proud of the science that we do from our different agencies, from the National Science Foundation, NASA, from NOAA. I mean, NASA has ICESat, that, satellite measurement of ice cap down to the width of a pencil from above, and the international collaboration, that takes place as part of that effort. So, we've got to continue to facilitate that collaboration. I'm sorry. Repeat the last part of your question.
And then looking at security and vessels that can also provide security or commerce.
Yeah, thank you. So, we are behind in the development of icebreakers. We've got a great science vessel, the Healy, the Coast Guard does. We need more. Coast Guard has a recapitalization program. We've got icebreakers online for the future. It'll take a few years before the first is in the water. But we've got 2 very modern, effective, heavy icebreakers funded already, a third partially funded, and plans for more after that. So we're going to get there. And we'd like to be a little farther along, but I think this is a region that is going to change over the years, and we have to be ready for what is coming 10, 20 years from now, and I believe that we will be.
Minister Hoig, thank you for your patience. Let's talk about how Greenland is preparing for a future 10, 20 years from now. I attended a panel you were at yesterday, and a lot of it focused on opportunities for development, for tourism. But Greenland is ultimately one of the victims of climate change. I mean, we know that the Arctic is warming 3 times faster. Dr. Holdren said yesterday 4 times faster. How does Greenland look to the future right now?
Well, firstly, we look at the importance of living up to our name, the green land. So the technologies into hydropower, into the production of green fuels, into the use of rare earth elements in the green transition. That's something that we really see ourselves contributing to in a few decades ahead of now. So basically that's where we see our economic future. Beside the development of tourism, we are working on development of rather big infrastructure projects. We are having 3 airports being built right now, and we just see the possibility of tourism as being one of the pillars of our future economy.
How do you think about preparing Greenland for climate change and the changes that are coming and that are already happening where you live?
Yeah, they're already happening, and we see some very sad things. Due to the changes in the permafrost, I mean, we are even having some landslides, rock slides that has been affecting some of our villages. I mean, we are having casualties from that. We are having villages being abandoned due to that climate crisis. But on the other hand, we just have to find solutions. We have to find other opportunities for us. But we also see a fisheries that is developing in a new direction. We are seeing new species arriving in our water. So I think there's pros and cons in this development. Generally, it's a very sad development, but that's we are trying to find a new setting for us in the future.
Ambassador Bolton, tell us about the work that you're doing right now, and how the priority of the Arctic is being seen. And I want to circle back to the question of indigenous voices and the role that they have as Washington talks about the Arctic, the future, and I'm so curious about how robust it feels right now compared to past years.
Thanks, Louie. That's a good question. So I started in the U.S. government in 1985, and I've seen a lot of administrations come and go. This administration seemed to want from the beginning to make its own mark with respect to Arctic things, and in particular to turn certain pages from the previous administration, and in particular there, with respect to climate change. And so they took a number of actions. President Biden and his administration did in the first year. We appointed some new people to the U.S. Arctic Research Commission. I'm very happy about that, and got a new chair as well. And there's an effort that's almost done to create a new national strategy for the Arctic region. It hasn't been done since 2013. And it was time to do that. Things had changed enough, both domestically and internationally. And they recreated or reactivated a group that I'm responsible for now. It's called the Arctic Executive Steering Committee. It's an effort to try to coordinate the work of some 18 different federal agencies that have some responsibility in the Arctic, either domestically here in Alaska or internationally as well. And so we have launched a number of initiatives I'm very happy about. I'll go say more about that later, but to answer your particular question, this administration, of all the ones I've served in, also seems uniquely committed to working, and here I want to say with Native Americans throughout our country, in a way that is exciting to me. And of course, in the Arctic, that means the Arctic indigenous peoples and Alaska Natives. And just to take one example that I'm really happy about, it's sort of getting underway right now. President Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office reinstating something that was struck down during the last administration called the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Area. The thing about it that I find really exciting is that the executive order envisions a partnership between the federal government on the one hand and the Alaska Native communities in that part of the state on the other. They're forming and have formed just a couple of weeks ago a tribal advisory council. We're looking to the very first meeting of this federal task force and this tribal advisory council. And together, we are going to try, I hope, to figure out not only what to do about the food security crisis in this part of the state, but maybe, one can hope, create some kind of model for working together better than the models we've had before. There is a lot to do here in the state, and it may be that one consequence of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the renewed invasion, the further invasion, is that we may wind up focusing more attention here at home in the Arctic. There's certainly a lot to do.
Doctor, I see you nodding your head yes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think for me, the real quandary is earlier David shaking his head that normalcy is not going to happen, and Aya is saying we can't move forward in terms of Arctic cooperation without the Russian Federation. And what comes to the forefront of my mind is the international legal order and the fact that the basic principles of the international legal order continue. The pillars that we have constructed, maybe not we as indigenous people, certainly, because we weren't parties to the establishment of these, of the important principles of human rights, the important principles of peace and security, the important principles of the rule of law, the important principles of development. And if you think about some of these things through the lens of indigenous peoples, they're important reminders for all of us. And I welcome what has just been said about maybe this is an opportunity to find the time to carefully address the status, rights, and role, interests, and concerns and perspectives of indigenous peoples through genuine partnership. And I think that the reality of the pillars of the international legal order, that all the ingredients are there. We just need to mix them up and find some solutions to the issues that we are facing. And to some extent, and I've thought about this in relation to a present project that I'm engaged in now as the co-chair of a Lancet Commission study on accelerating Arctic indigenous peoples' health and wellness. And I was really heartened to see the Lancet Commission's commentary on the situation of Russia and its invasion, and their desire to ensure that we keep all of the lines of communication open, that we allow for collegiality, collaboration, consultation, cooperation. And many of the things that were stated by the Lancet pivoted on doing so without bias, based on national origin or based on cultural identity. And to a large extent, this is what Inuit have been saying for decades, that we as original inhabitants of the region need to have this opportunity. We need to have the political and intellectual space to make the contributions that we can. And so that partnership and building that partnership, maybe this is an opportune time to kind of turn the corner, maybe not necessarily away from these problematic issues of the international legal order and peace and security specifically, but to turn the corner and really focus on concrete and comprehensive ways to engage Inuit, to engage indigenous peoples, consistent with the pillars of the international legal order. And I'll underscore the human rights of Inuit and the human rights of indigenous peoples.
Minister Hoig, I saw you making a motion there to speak.
Yeah, I was just having a little comment in relation to Ukraine. We have decided, or the government of Greenland has decided to impose sanctions, and that's actually something that means there is a price tag to it for us. The export to Russia last year was actually 14.6% of our total exports, and that is something that we are going to feel, quite hard. And that means that we have to look for new markets. And our export has been very much eastbound, and we are just hoping that we will succeed in getting new markets westbound. And like-minded nations like the United States, we just hope that it will be possible for us to find new markets for what we are losing, in terms of that we have to stand very clear on our opinions on what is happening out there.
Yeah, Libby, if I could address your question, what are we doing and what do we want to do? I think in a sense we could sort of boil it down to one word, which is presence. We want to be present in every respect across the region. So we opened a consulate in Nuuk. I think best thing that we have done in recent years as far as our diplomatic presence. We've looked at our other embassies across the region, the Nordic countries and in Canada, to make sure that they're properly staffed and resourced, and that we can be more present in the Arctic part of these countries and be more present with remote communities, and particularly indigenous communities across the region, and to be, I'll use the word presence in a different way, present as listeners, I think, engaged in a real dialogue with indigenous communities across the region. We also have to be present in the security realm and through NATO and together with our allies, and through NORAD with Canada. We have to be present in the science realm and collecting data from across the entire region so we better understand climate change, and we've got to help our businesses be present in the Arctic, which is not an easy place to do business. It can be expensive, but is necessary to generate livelihoods.
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Kenneth Larson.
Yes. We have a saying at our party, which are leading the government in Greenland. So this is actually a saying of the government in Greenland, and that's nothing about us without us. And I think so many indigenous peoples around the Arctic can see themselves in that. And I think it's about, great powers also giving away some powers to indigenous peoples in order to make sure that we're being heard, but also that we're actually, making the decisions on what's going on in our countries and in our lands. And I think that's a very important point to make, that because I know the saying for the Americans in Greenland is presence equals influence. And there's so much interest in Greenland, just as an example, and also in the Arctic, and how do we steer on around all these interests and make sure that it's not causing, a conflict on what's going on in the Arctic. And, listening to indigenous people and people living in the Arctic is so important. And we want to have, welfare. We would like to have good school for our children. We would like to have a good life, good everyday life for people living there. And with the focus on security issues, just from my point of view, we're focusing so much in the Danish Parliament on, bringing more activities on military issues also in the Arctic. And how do we, keep on making sure that there will still be peace in the Arctic? Because I think we all can agree on that. We would like to have peace. But we also need to make sure, can we make that happen? We need to have reflections on how do we make that happen, and how do we collaborate, and how do we listen to the people living there in order to make sure that, all of these things are being taken into considerations. And it's just, I think it's so important to listen to the people living there, and not just in the end of an agreement, for example, but in the start of a process, and making sure that, we're getting the knowledge, so we're actually able to make sure that we can, contribute to the decisions that are being taken in the Arctic.
Mr. DeHart, did you want to say something? I can. I want you to be able to talk and have some conversation here, because you've all been so generous sitting through many structured panels. But we have about a half hour left, so if you do want to comment, please jump in. Go right ahead.
So I have an example that's near and dear to my heart, to build on what you were saying. Just last year, a new international agreement entered into force that prohibits unregulated commercial fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean. Representatives of the indigenous communities from the United States, Canada, and Greenland not only participated in the negotiations, but persuaded everyone to include in a binding international agreement the requirement to use indigenous knowledge, and provided for the participation of representatives of Arctic indigenous communities in the implementation of the agreement. It may be a first. What we don't know is whether this agreement can move forward, because one of the 10 parties is Russia. The first meeting of the parties is scheduled for next November. I'm hoping it will happen. Will it happen with Russia? I don't know. Can it happen without Russia? I don't know. And yet, there is something exciting about all this. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that into the mix.
Yeah, and I think that's what you pose in terms of questions is really important, because from an indigenous perspective, great power competition or great power cooperation shouldn't be the precondition for dialogue, right? That dialogue and the opportunities, and this is why I think the international legal order is so important, is that you're talking about a binding international treaty, and there's nothing that prevents the kind of collegiality that we enjoyed in the Arctic Council to proceed in the present circumstance, and that. For example, the Inuit Circumpolar Council and going back to my earlier comment that we emerged out of the Cold War, and in 1977, Eben Hobson made a plea for the uniform respect of our rights. And as you said earlier, there's an opportunity to build on that. And I think for that kind of consultation, cooperation to ensue, not solely on the basis of the current problem of great power competition, and again, the necessity of great power cooperation. Of course, the latter would yield much more substantive results for everyone in terms of cooperation, but I think that we've illustrated as Indigenous peoples the opportunity to transcend borders and communicate in order to achieve our shared interests. And it's created difficulties, certainly. The great power competition has created difficulties for us, but nevertheless, we still extend our hand, across such borders. How things will emerge, I mean, the uncertainty is really difficult to grapple with here, but I think there are ways and means to allow it to happen, certainly with the 7 of 8. I don't know what the solution is. I'd probably be in a different position if I did have the solution.
I just want to invite Ambassador Kaizo Takiwaka to
Okay.
jump in for a moment.
I think the two things are clear. Number one, we cannot postpone Arctic agenda, and number two is that we cannot continue, our business as usual with Russia. Like, you can't travel to Russia or have a meeting with Russia. It's unthinkable under current circumstances. But it doesn't mean that we should cut down the network of scientists and the network of indigenous people. So under the constraint of the current condition, well, I think that we Japan would like to pursue possible scientific network. Japan started a new version of national flagship project in 2020, ACTS 2. And that is a kind of a comprehensive project to cover all the Arctic, not only natural science, but also humanities and social science. We have a very fair big network of people. So, well, maybe they might face some difficulties, but we are not willing to intentionally cut down those network of people.
I mean, I guess the question comes as to what the carve-outs look like. I mean, if there are exceptions and buffers made around scientific research, if there are alliances and collaborative projects that are allowed to continue, what does that do to diplomacy? I can throw that to the two of you. Ms. Chemnitz-Larsen, what does that do to the broader question of Russia's role in the world order and diplomacy?
I think there's so much work still going on between countries. It could be bilateral, it could be between several countries, and I think that will continue, and I think that's very important to support politically as well. But just touching upon, some of the many very wise things that I have learned during this conference, and yesterday there were a lot of young people sitting here, and one of them was saying, the world is ready for us to be indigenous again. And I thought that was so incredible, because I think it's about, making sure that there will also be room enough for minorities and indigenous peoples, and having their voices heard as well. And another person was telling to me that Inuk values is very much about community, family, and then me. And maybe for a lot of the other countries in the Western world, I would say it's the other way around. It's me first, then it's family, and then it's community. And another thing that I heard was leadership is not about me. Leadership is about my community and how I, make sure that the community is thriving. And I think these three quotes are so important to remember, because now the conference is also about to close. And I think it's, figuring out a way of how can minorities and majorities and the North and the South collaborate. And this is something that I feel I've been, working so much on, and I have so many thoughts on this issue. And, just the fact between Greenland and Denmark, how can we make sure that we're equal? And can we be equal when we're two so different entities? I think it's an important question also to look into, but I think it's the only way to go to be equal and to understand that all the people, and especially the people living in the Arctic, are important when we discuss matters that has to do with the Arctic.
Mr. DeHart, I turn to you to ask about how the diplomacy pivots if we see carve-outs or exceptions or workarounds so that scientific research doesn't wither, that's already been so invested in, so that alliances across, whether it's universities or, I almost said trade, but that gets us into a whole other zone.
Yeah, it's hard, and it's very unclear, I think, to look at the whole universe of activities. In the Arctic Council, we've been clear. Temporary pause, and those words chosen very carefully among the like-mindeds. Not a withdrawal from the Council, not a reconstitution of the Council, not an effort to change the membership of the Council, but a pause as we figure out the way forward. And as we figure out the way forward among the like-mindeds, and we need to think that through and articulate that at the right time. I think it's the overarching concern is how do we move forward in a way that doesn't permanently damage the Council? If we lose a few months of cooperation in the Council, that's not ideal. But if we preserve the Council for the long term, that's the crucial objective. And the Council is best when there's all 8 states of the Arctic. And the Council is best when there are all the communities of the Arctic that are involved in the activities. And so that's the long-term goal that will govern our actions. There's a variety of, I think, probably interactions that are still out there in the scientific community. And I hope that the good work that is being done by individual Russian scientists out there, which may not be shareable or can't be convened in the immediate future, will be there in the future at the right time for people to come back together.
Can you talk a little bit about how important the Arctic is as a priority to Washington? How has the development of your job gone? And would we see a future of an Arctic ambassador representing the United States?
So, it's always difficult to talk about the end of one's time in the job, but
you still have many, many months.
Exactly.
Lots of time.
Exactly.
In Washington time, it's a lot of time.
Yeah. So what I can say is this: there will certainly be senior attention to this portfolio by this administration in the form of an appointment of some kind. But that'll be, I think, announced at the right moment. But I think, the day of sort of long gaps in attention and questions about whether somebody will be appointed and whether it's a high enough priority to require that sort of enduring attention, I think those days are gone. And everybody understands on both sides of the political aisle how important this set of issues is. And so, me or somebody like me or somebody higher than me is here to stay.
Okay. You heard it here, but no commitment on a... We'll talk later. Minister, when Greenland makes efforts to work and find partnerships on things like trade, tourism, are you looking to, as you look towards our fair shores, are you looking to work with states? Are you finding success working on a federal level, or do you seem to be able to develop more as you look at, smaller governments here, whether it's Canadian or United States, to find opportunities with?
I guess we will work on both levels, on both on a federal level and also on a state level. I mean, we have proximity to the northeastern part of the US, but we also have a lot of links and cultural ties and linguistic ties to Alaska. And many things can be looked into for corporations with Alaska, all the way from investments to also sharing best practices within our administrations. I think we share so many things with Alaska in so many ways, especially, we do have it through ICC, that it has been, almost soon 50 years that we have been doing that. But we do look into the possibilities of more formal ties between Greenland and Alaska, the state of Alaska. We do try to develop much more commercial ties with the northeastern part of the whole of the U.S. But I guess the eastern part is by good reasons. But I mean, it's closer. It's the closest part. It's closer. It's much closer to the New England states than to Denmark, for instance, and that makes it interesting for us.
May I ask you to talk a little bit more about where you see the Arctic in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, and how you see your nation's prominence and importance in helping us take us forward as we think about the Arctic and its not just survival, but potential to thrive.
I agree with Kenneth, and I see so much potential, not only between Greenland and Alaska, but also with Nunavut and Canada as well, because I would say, especially language-wise, cultural-wise, we share so much. And I know so many people in Greenland, they're so excited when people are coming from Alaska or from Canada to Greenland and, giving different cultural events or attending different cultural events. So, looking back or looking ahead in the future, I would see much more collaboration that way. Greenland is a part of the Arctic, but we're also a part of the Nordic. And I think for us, it's about taking the best from both worlds in order to make sure that the society is thriving, both when it comes to language. We're actually quite good at making sure that the Greenlandic language is being saved, and a lot of people in Greenland speak the Greenlandic language, but also that the culture is there and it's modernized. And in many ways, I would say that Greenland is very good at preserving the cultural traditions, but at the same time also being a modern society. And I hope we will, continue to do that, but to have even more collaboration, and especially when it comes to trade, it makes so much sense. We're so close to each other, and I hope the economy of Greenland is better. I hope we have even more independence than what we have right now, but that we have a good collaboration also with Denmark and with the Nordic countries, and that Greenland is opening up towards the rest of the world. And I remember when Trump, he said he wanted to buy Greenland a couple of years ago, and the government of Greenland was saying, we're open for business, but we're not for sale. And I just want to say, open for business is still on. And I think it's going to be very important to make sure that we are actually, having business between the countries and making sure that, indigenous peoples are being, at the forefront and the leaders of our own communities. And I think that's the best way to make sure that the Arctic is thriving, because I'm quite hopeful, because we were asked that question the first day. I'm very hopeful for the future of the Arctic, actually. I think there's so much potential in many ways.
I mean, it's a bleak time on the world stage. So that's heartening to hear.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear what you think as you look into the future.
Yeah, no, I was encouraged by the reference that you made, Aya, especially of the bilateral and the multilateral opportunities that do exist, and especially in favor of Inuit, especially in favor of Arctic indigenous peoples. And what comes to the forefront of my mind, and PJ Akiok, who's in the audience, will be well aware of this, is the opportunity, for example, between Denmark, Canada, Nunavut, Greenland government, and the rights holders out there and on the ground in terms of the Pikiala Sosuak Implementation Committee, the as it's known in Canada, Savayuak, opportunity to really do something that's responsive to upholding the rights of the Inuit in this particular region, the North Water Polynya. This is a perfect example for the kind of bilateral pathway toward doing something favorable in terms of climate change, food security, cultural security, all the things that the ICC has been concerned about throughout its entire life. So I think identifying those opportunities, despite the turmoil, that we should capture them. We should take the opportunity to seize them. And maybe one other final comment is that even though there's been a pretty intense spillover impact of the current conflict, perhaps in some small footnote, it has shined a brighter light on the Arctic as a priority for many, including the United States. So it's, and maybe it can be used kind of in that fashion, if not for anything else. So, and my hope, of course, for the future, just to respond to your initial question, is for us to take those opportunities, but to do so in lockstep with Inuit, in lockstep with Arctic indigenous peoples, and to take advantage of the opportunities as they arise, and ensure that our voices are the loudest in this particular context.
Thank you. Ambassador Bolton.
I hope Delhi's right, but I have to say that for myself, my view of the future of the Arctic changed on February 24th. Prior to that, I did say many times in places just like this, that it was an extraordinary region marked by a high level of international cooperation and a peaceful, stable place where governments set aside problems that they had in other parts of the world and over other issues to pursue their common interests. We found ways to work with the Arctic residents, particularly the Arctic indigenous peoples that still represented in some level, maybe a high watermark internationally. There were serious problems even before February 24th in the Arctic, but there tended to be socioeconomic and environmental in nature, but we had a structure for addressing those. And the climate problem, for which the Arctic was sort of, the canary in the coal mine or poster child, pushed us forward to, I think we might not have the Paris Agreement, but for the melting of the Arctic and the attention it had gotten. Since February 24th, I'm worried because some of what made the Arctic special, made it exceptional, seems not at hand at the moment. And we need to find a new way forward, working with those with whom we can work. But it is going to be hard, and whether we can get back to the feeling I had about the Arctic prior to then anytime soon, I really don't know. And I'm an optimist by nature, but I do worry. The moment we're in now seems like we've reached some kind of inflection point. It feels to me, I was talking to you earlier, like the collapse of the Soviet Union itself or 9/11, just in terms of how it has required us to reconsider broad range of issues before us. Maybe there are things we can take from this crisis and actually work on better than before. I hope you're right about that. That's our challenge.
Minister, how do you look on that future that we're hearing about now?
Well, when we have storms, then eventually we will have calm waters. And I think it's so important that we conserve the cooperation for the time being, and and then go back to this fully fledged Arctic cooperation that we used to. But first of all, let's conserve it because there's so many values, there's so many good things in it, and there's so much potential. So let's just hope for this. Let's hope we'll get to the calm waters as soon as possible. But as soon as possible, when will that be, of course? Yeah.
Coordinator DeHart, as you have taken on this assignment, what has struck you about the Arctic? I mean, I wish I had this poll, but if you polled Americans and asked them, are we an Arctic nation? I don't know if I'd want to see the results because Alaska is so physically far away. Talk to us and reflect for us on what has struck you about these relationships and also this place.
I think the first thing that struck me on a personal level is sort of the passion of everybody that works on all of the Arctic issues, right? And from the youth to those representing indigenous communities, to the science community, to the Arctic analysts. I mean, there's a fascinating realm of people doing all of this work, and truly interested. What I've sort of come to conclude is really related to your other question, 20 or 30 years out ahead. And I'm a diplomat, so I see it as a great strategic question. I see the Arctic 20 or 30 years from now as being a much busier place, but also very unpredictable, and what that means. And I think that 20 to 30 years from now, it's very hard to know how all of these movements and changes, dynamic transformations will sort of play out. And so we have to do something that democracies aren't very good at, which is plan and 20 to 30 years down the road, and to invest with long lead times, because these investments take time. And that's really challenging for our systems to pull off, but we need to do that because it's going to change absolutely dramatically. The other thing is, we're diplomats, we're paid to look outward. We're not paid to look at US states, but it's unavoidable with the Arctic. You have to look at the state of Alaska, because what we do in the state of Alaska as a government, as communities, has a real impact on our national interests and whether we can project influence beyond the American Arctic. When we think about, deep draft port and low Earth orbit satellites to deliver broadband to communities and communications to Coast Guard, and even NORAD modernization, I think you have this domestic foreign policy link. And so I think we have to think a lot about where can we invest wisely in a way that's multi-purpose and multi-benefit. Comes right back to what our administration has talked about the connection between domestic renewal and foreign policy success. Can't be strong at home, or can't be strong at home if you're not effective overseas, can't be effective overseas if you're not strong at home. It applies absolutely perfectly to the state of Alaska.
We will end on that note. Thank you so much to all of you. Really appreciate your insights today. Thank you. Thank you.